好，該晒。
歡迎大家出席可持續發展委。
Welcome to the press conference for the report on public engagement on long-term decarbonization strategy by the SDC. Professor Arthur Lee, Chairman of the Council for Sustainable Development, would chair the meeting. And we also have in attendance Professor Jonathan Wong, Chairman of the Strategy Subcommittee, and the Center for Civil Society and Governance of the University of Hong Kong would be the responsible organization. Professor Arthur Lee, please. First of all, I welcome you to the press conference. The Paris Agreement passed in 2015 was a historic international agreement, and the idea is to build a future that is low carbon, climate resilient, and sustainable. According to the agreement, member states agreed to limit the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, while pursuing efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Paris Agreement also applies to the Hong Kong SAR, and as such, the SAR government announced Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan 2030 Plus in 2017 to establish the carbon reduction targets leading up to 2030, and Hong Kong has been moving along this direction. However, what could be done after the year 2030? Should we establish a more aggressive target for Hong Kong in order to explore our long-term decarbonization strategy? The government invited the Sustainable Development Council to adopt a bottom-up and stakeholder-based approach to conduct a territory-wide public engagement exercise, and the objective is to educate the public on the impacts of carbon emissions while collecting views from different stakeholders to help the government establish a long-term policy. The report we are announcing today is the result of the Council taking in different people's views, and recommendations have been filed. The committee believes that Hong Kong should move towards zero carbon emissions by the year 2050, and the report lists out 6 overarching objectives and 55 recommendations, and these include 8 different areas, including carbon reduction targets, low carbon living, education, training, and research, built environment, energy, transport, city planning and management, and finance. I understand that it's not easy to move towards zero net carbon emissions by the year 2050, but the SDC, having considered public expectations and circumstances of Hong Kong, believes this is a responsible and appropriate choice. Hong Kong is an advanced economy with sound infrastructure and talent, and with our solid financial position, we are in position to establish a more aggressive target. The SDC's recommendations are in line with our nation's efforts to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. I hope the government would adopt the SDC's recommendations and that everyone could work together to achieve such target. I now invite Professor Jonathan Wong, Chairman of the Strategy Subcommittee of the SDC, to walk us through the public engagement process. Thank you very much. Good morning. I would now explain the process of public engagement. During the public interaction phase, the SDC held 65 public engagement activities in total, including 5 district fora. We also visited schools, consulted relevant advisory groups, and met various stakeholders, including youth groups, NGOs, green groups, business associations, and relevant sectors. A total of about 4,500 people took part, and the turnout was the highest among public engagement exercises conducted by SDC. The exercise aims to enhance public understanding on the impacts of carbon emissions and to take in views from the public and stakeholders on Hong Kong's long-term decarbonization strategy. Some of the objectives are long-term in nature, and it might be a few decades before they could be achieved. But nonetheless, it's important to collect views from our young people. The SDC visited 14 secondary schools, and through dramas, performances, presentations, and Q&A sessions, the young people were able to take part, and the response showed that the activities could enhance their interest and understanding on carbon reduction, and they were able to offer their views on the issue. Many people also offered their views through collection forms as well as by email, posts, or via our website. And during the public interaction phase, the SDC received a total of 71,000 views collection forms as well as 52 submissions from organizations or companies, as well as more than 5,000 petition letters. The amounts of submissions we received were the highest in the last 10 years, and we can see the public interest in the theme. The public engagement exercise on long-term decarbonization is extremely challenging. Apart from the many views we collected, the progress of the PE exercise was affected by the COVID-19 epidemic, and as such, the SDC and consultancy needed a longer time to complete the report. As Professor Lee said, the long-term decarbonization vision listed in the report is for Hong Kong to move towards zero net carbon emissions by the year 2050. I would now invite Winnie, the program director, to talk about the 55 recommendations under the vision.
Good morning. I think we can now first take a look at the slides. Like Professor Wong said, after collecting all the views, we suggested within the council, the committee had many discussions, and the consensus arrived at is that we should be able to set up a long-term vision. That is, before 2050, we would be able to gradually migrate towards the target of zero emission. We call it net zero. And we also call it carbon neutrality. And this target, we understand, is actually more or less in line with the advanced countries which have signed the Paris Accord or agreement. In order to achieve this target, there are various means which have to be adopted. And therefore, under this target, the Commission or the Council has set 6 targets. First of all, to actually encourage, promote the community to migrate towards a low-carbon lifestyle. And also, we may need to review the energy mix and migrate to the use of zero-carbon energy. In terms of the built environment, we hope to be now on the basis of many of the regulations and in place and the incentives offered, we would do a better job in terms of sustainable building. And in terms of transportation, carbon emission make up 18% of the total emissions. So we hope that we will be able to migrate towards low carbon transport. And Hong Kong, we would also like to transform into a green economy and develop green finance. But between now and 2030, there would be many changes and technological developments. So we hope that people would be able to come up with more innovative suggestions to mitigate the impact of climate change. Under these 6 broad directions. We have various policies and incentives before we are able to achieve our target. The committee actually arrived at a consensus in respect of the 55 recommendations, which straddle over 8 areas, including the overall target, lifestyle, education, training and research, built environment, energy, transport, urban planning and management, and finance. Among these 8 areas, they involve softwares like changing our lifestyle, and there are also hardwares involving transport, urban planning, and so on. So we should not also overlook how the financial industry and the economy can actually help us achieve the objective. With that, I will now defer to my colleagues to go through those 55 specific recommendations. Next, I'd like to spend some time to brief you on some of our major recommendations under these 8 areas. In setting the long-term target, so in the process of decarbonization, the committee believed that we should use the following measures as the basis. We need to work out a clear roadmap with milestones, and also there should be periodic reviews. Under the Paris Agreement, we need to conduct a review of our achievements in decarbonization every 5 years. The committee also recommends that we should assess the decarbonization measures adopted by different sectors and their effectiveness. Thirdly, the committee believes that in respect of the key sectors like energy, construction and transport, there should be a specific and evidence-based target for decarbonization. Fourthly, we should step up interdepartmental collaboration and cooperation with different stakeholders so that we will be able to achieve the decarbonization target as soon as possible. In the long term, we also recommend that we should monitor the progress of decarbonization in different industries, and taking on board the development technology, we should adjust our decarbonization measures accordingly. Secondly, lifestyle. During the public engagement exercise, the majority views we have received, that is, the majority of the general public, and believe that changing personal lifestyle is an important step to achieve low decarbonization. And the committee has come up with these recommendations. In the near term, we should actively promote the low carbon lifestyle, including, for example, community outreach work, and also assessing the performance of individuals in terms of decarbonization, building up a learning platform, encouraging NGOs to make use of the resources and networks to encourage the public to help implement the migration to a low-carbon lifestyle. Secondly, in Hong Kong, being an externally oriented economy, most of our daily necessities have to be imported. And that is why the committee believes that we need to enhance the consumer's understanding of the carbon footprint of different goods and services. And at the same time, we should provide financial incentives and support to help consumers make sensible choices. For example, using more local products. Other than that, we also recommend that we should promote zero carbon design, encourage waste reduction at source, and have the proper infrastructures to encourage recycling and waste reduction. And in view of the epidemic, the committee believes that we should make use of digital technology to further promote local tours in order to minimize travel and tours abroad. In the long term, the committee also recommends that we should consider adopting a consumption-based accounting to calculate the energy emission produced by imported goods and services, so that we will be able to understand the status of carbon emission in Hong Kong. We should also encourage the business sector to develop, low carbon or low emission products and continue to lead the development of a low carbon economy. In terms of education, training and research, many of the feedbacks told us that we need to educate young people and adolescents to be more concerned about the impact of climate change. As we migrate towards a low carbon, society, talent is a very important asset, and that is why, in terms of human resources, we need to ask whether we have the appropriate expertise and technologies or skills. This is very important, and the committee would like to invite the tertiary institutions and professional bodies to provide professional training for, policy decision makers and professional people in terms of, in-service training and certificate courses in order to cope with the need for decarbonisation. In terms of regular courses and, training, we should enhance increase the element of, carbon decarbonization, for example, including subjects like international agreement on climate change and so on, so that we can provide an all-round, education. Thirdly, the built environment. I think we know very well that in Hong Kong, the carbon emission buildings tend to, consume energy and emit, and there is carbon emission. So we need to reduce the energy use so that we can drastically reduce carbon emission. And this includes the following. First of all, we should come up with regulatory measures. For example, in the design and operation of buildings, we should implement a higher standard. And secondly, we should provide economic incentives to encourage the business sector, companies, and the whole community to adopt energy efficient measures and also decarbonization measures. For the existing buildings, the committee also suggests as to whether or not for the schools and NGOs we should provide subsidies and technical support so that they will be able to obtain certification for green building and achieve the target for decarbonization. We should also provide incentives for the SMEs to encourage them to adopt low carbon or decarbonization measures. We have two suggestions in terms of new developments and the requirements, environmental requirements, as conditions for them to obtain some concessions. And also there should be a compliance mechanism to regularly monitor the performance of these buildings upon completion. The committee also recommends that we should formulate low carbon and passive design guidelines and requirements. For example, encouraging to make sure that there's good ventilation for buildings. In the medium term, we also came up with these recommendations. That is how we can enhance the energy standards. We suggest that we should encourage the construction industry to adopt new construction technologies and come up with labeling schemes and set up benchmarks to encourage the industry to adopt more energy efficient construction materials. In terms of energy and carbon audit, we will encourage the landlords to carry out such audits and enhance the performance data. In the long term, the committee, after thorough deliberation, recommends that we should provide a public database regarding the energy consumption by buildings in order to encourage landlords and the community to compete and to carbon decarbonization. And we also want to cover infrastructures and public space. And the committee also suggests that for our infrastructures in the built environment, we should come up with a certification scheme.
On the long run, we would come up with ways to limit energy consumption at the buildings by establishing caps. But we would have to consider the actual feasibility, technical viability, as well as the features of different building types. In terms of energy, it has a key role to play in terms of long-term decarbonization. And that is why we are recommending different measures by transitioning to low-carbon energy sources, promoting the waste-to-energy projects, and we will also step up the research and development for renewable energy and to make use of emerging alternative fuel. Due to technology and land use constraints, if we rely on renewable energy alone in the medium to long term, it will be difficult to satisfy our energy demands. So in terms of decarbonization, imported energy still has a key role to play. And I would talk about the various measures. On the short run, we would use new low-carbon energy sources such as green hydrogen and to support relevant R&D in the local academia. And we will also promote renewable energy, including the installation of distributable RE equipment and the installation of floating PV panels. And we will also review the local RE target based on the progress of feed-in tariff scheme and the availability of new technologies. And we will leverage on LNG as an interim energy option to help reduce carbon emissions. And in terms of nuclear energy, we would explore how we can make safe use of imported nuclear energy as a source of power. In the medium to long term, the SDC recommends stepping up cross-departmental coordination and formulating more proactive strategies in order to source zero-carbon energy sources globally. We will also develop relevant infrastructure in order to receive and utilize imported zero-carbon energy. In terms of transport, like Winnie said, transportation is the second largest greenhouse gas emission sector in Hong Kong. Many of the SDC's recommendations are about transforming our transportation systems. In the short term, the SDC suggests maintaining the role of railway as the backbone of public transport network, and we should continue to encourage the public to use public transport. And in terms of promoting electric vehicles, and these include both private and commercial vehicles, the SDC suggests setting up a holistic roadmap and to formulate progressive targets. These should include incentives for owners to switch to EV, development of charging infrastructure, management of EV battery recycling and disposal, etc. We will enhance or to encourage the transport sector to apply new energy technologies. And we must accelerate the adoption and growth of new energy vehicles, including EVs and possibly hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, as well as green ferries. These can reduce carbon emissions and air pollution. In terms of the use of hydrogen as a possible fuel, we see that There are still uncertainties to the technical feasibility and cost effectiveness, and that is why we must explore on the long run whether they are viable in Hong Kong. The SDC will roll out a timeline to gradually phase out vehicles that use fossil fuel, and they would align the practice with other advanced economies. If internal combustion engines are to be banned completely, a clear roadmap would be provided and a transition period would be offered for the sector. Other recommendations include further restraining automobile ownership and discouraging the use of private cars while encouraging walking, etc. In terms of the shipping and aviation industries, the SDC will continue to encourage the use of green technologies and transition to low carbon or zero carbon fuels. We will consult the sector and relevant stakeholders. On city planning and management, the key is to incorporate decarbonization and climate action in all the government's development strategies as well as planning guidelines. The SDC will continue to promote walkability and foster a bike-friendly environment and to develop a more coordinated strategy to take forward greening and vegetation projects and establish an information database of the carbon reduction potential of different species and facilitate the restoration and protection of our natural carbon sinks such as country and marine parks. We will also formulate an integrated and long-term low-carbon development strategy to minimize long-distance commuting and carbon emissions in new development areas and renewal projects. And on the long run, we would strengthen Hong Kong's position as a smart and low-carbon city. For instance, by designating low-carbon emission zones or zero-carbon emission zones, we would pilot electronic road pricing schemes to alleviate localized traffic congestion and associated roadside vehicle emission. Finally, finance. Like the speakers have said before me, Hong Kong as a financial hub can certainly take the lead in promoting green finance, and the capital could be directed to areas that can benefit our society and environment. The SDC would closely monitor the carbon pricing, including carbon taxes and carbon transaction systems and their global development, and to understand their potential in mitigating climate change. In the short term, green and sustainable finance could be developed through the Green and Sustainable Finance Cross-Agency Steering Group. Meanwhile, we will promote the development of ESG reporting and disclosure so that more corporations will consider climate factors in making management and investment decisions. Finally, in the medium term, the SDC would explore opportunities of developing a wider spectrum of green and sustainable financial products by tracking international trends in order to encourage corporations and organizations to move to cleaner energy sources. So that's all for our briefing. So over to the chairman, please.
Thank you very much. We now come to the Q&A session. If you want to ask a question, please put up your hand and we'll give you a microphone. Before you ask your question, please tell us the organization you represent. The gentleman over there.
Thank you, Professor Lee. This is James with Transit Jam. Two questions, actually. Firstly, on equity in decarbonisation. I was reading a report yesterday that decarbonisation strategies actually can widen the gap, the wealth gap and the class gaps. An example in Hong Kong, we see electric cars, for example, are very expensive. Like 70% of them are over $500,000. So only really the rich can afford these technologies. So I wonder how, in the process of public engagement, you ensured that the voices of the sort of the lower incomes and the poorer segments of the community were heard. So that's one question. And the second question, you mentioned you want to encourage a bike-friendly environment. Transport Department, even in this month, has told me that biking is not recommended in urban areas, for example. Secretary for Development in LegCo yesterday, I think, said biking was only for recreation and only for leisure. So we don't really have a bike-friendly city. The government, the Transport Department in particular, has a very outdated view of cycling. So what would the SDC actually do about that to actually change those mindsets? Thank you.
Perhaps I answer your second question first. Biking, what we are asking really in this report is that there needs to be a change in lifestyle. Right? A change in lifestyle means that we should be doing more walking, save energy, and so on and so forth. As to the public engagement, we have actually engaged all sector of the community and not just the wealthy people. So we have taken into account. As to the electric vehicles, there are many ways that, as you know, buying a car is expensive in Hong Kong because of the tax. There has been tax concessions for electric vehicles. So with that, we are encouraging that this should be the norm. And in many countries, they've already come out with a timetable as to when all the cars will go electric. We haven't come up to that yet to Hong Kong, but we recommend that this is something we should look at.
I can supplement one more point on the electric car. I would say that in this report, we stress that we don't go for the fossil fuel car, and the next will be electric car, but we put more emphasis on using public transport and the rail system. We try to develop that so that as a result, we not really depend on the private car. So I think that's the way to go, rather than everyone got one car. And you see that we would like to limit the number of people who can own a car. So that means we are not widening the gap. We narrow it down because people use public transport.
I think it's very important that this report is for the whole of Hong Kong. And one of the important things is not just the government that does everything. We have to change our lifestyle if we're going to get a zero carbon.
If I may follow up on that, and I'd certainly agree, but if I want to change my lifestyle and bike or ride my bicycle here to this press conference, there's nowhere to park it and I wouldn't be allowed in the building. And the government does not support bicycle parking in Hong Kong, for example, outside the new territories. So it's not just a case of people changing their lifestyle, the government needs to support it. What would you say to the Transport Department on that?
Could I add a point on that? I would say that is really a good suggestion to the government. And this report is bringing the direction. The direction is that we will increase the biking in Hong Kong. But how to deal with it? I think the government department need to think about it. In the future, not just building the bike in wood, maybe the parking space for the bike, we also need to be considered. And whether we will share bike in Hong Kong, we need to think about that. So we bring in the direction, but this needs some time to plan all this into our system, and also in the future planning of the city.
Although this report is submitted to the Environmental Bureau, but actually in the report we recommended that there should be a cross-bureau look into the whole issue and not just the environment. This will include housing, transport and so on, finance and so on. So this is a very comprehensive approach towards this decarbonisation problem.
HK01。你好，香港01嘅3條問題。
3 questions, Hong Kong 01. During the public engagement, you did ask the public whether they support regional collaboration. Have you received too much objection and that's why you've not put this in your report? Or have you omitted that? Secondly, how do you, for example, Mr. Lam Chiu Ying said that the meeting have not had frequent meetings and they have not been able to know the outcome of the PE for a long time, and he actually resigned from. So what is your comment? And also you told us that because of COVID-19, the report is released has been delayed. I think the report was already finished at the end of last year, but why the delay? Let me answer the question regarding Mr. Lam Chiu Ying. Mr. Lam Chiu Ying gave us very valuable views in the support group. We fully respect his comments and views. He might be a bit impatient. He really wants us to do a lot more, but we have to follow all the rules and procedures. And because of that, he's a little bit, dissatisfied. But overall, I believe he would agree with our report. Now, regarding the question of regional collaboration, we've not evaded the issue. It's just that we're saying that in Hong Kong, we do not have our own fuels. We cannot produce our own fuel, but we have to procure them. When we buy energy, the important thing is that we have a safe and reliable supply, and that there shouldn't be any adverse impact on the environment. And finally, the price should be reasonable. So our direction now is that we are not buying energy from a particular region or country. We will look at the situation in different regions and countries, look at the fuels that they produce and the stability of their supply, and whether. So Darwin already said that for hydrogen fuel cell is also one of our targets. This is a clean energy. You ask what is the international situation like? It is still at the development stage. And that's why we need to set short, medium, and long-term goals. During the short to medium term, we have reviewed the use of different energies and the supply in different countries. Our target is that clean energy will enable us to achieve zero emission. But we can't tell you where these energy come from. Several countries are now working on clean energy. And so they will really need to be able to achieve zero emission. You look at the use of hydrogen energy in Australia. It's still grey hydrogen, which it is actually produced out of fossil fuel, and there is still carbon emission. And that's why we'll not procure such energy from Australia. But one day they might have the technology to produce green hydrogen energy, at which time we may have to consider this clean energy. Whether or not they are safe, whether there is a stable supply, are other issues to look at. So regarding regional collaboration, we're not just looking at one particular country or region. We're looking at the whole world and the energy supply worldwide before we come up with our recommendation. I think you asked another question as well. Why the late release of the report? Well, the pandemic and the social event last year had affected the timetable of the release of the report. Remember that we have received 71,000 submissions, and I think this is unprecedented. With 71,000 submissions, the Hong Kong U, according to the survey conducted by the Hong Kong U, needed time to compile the report, and we also need to look at that. So in other words, so I hope you understand that the committee or the secretariat did not want to delay the release of this report. It's just that the workload was very heavy, so that the report took longer than expected. With the epidemic, we have to rely on Zoom meetings and so on, and things will slow down as a result. Most importantly, the report now sets a clear target for Hong Kong so that we will be able to migrate towards the target of zero carbon emission. And this is our objective.
From Oriental Daily, I have two questions. Among the 71,000 views, how many of them were supportive and how many were against the proposal? There are concerns about regional cooperation or having to purchase energy from the mainland, and that is why some people are against the decarbonization strategy. Could you tell us whether purchasing energy from the mainland would be among the options? Like I said, we would consider regional cooperation when it comes to purchase of energy, and we would not rule out China. Among the top 5 hydrogen energy players, China ranks in the top 5. So when it comes to zero emissions, why would we want to purchase energy from Australia? And of course, it's natural that we would purchase from our neighbors or somewhere closer to Hong Kong. If China produces hydrogen energy and that they meet international standards and safety requirements, this would be considered. So we would not rule out any specific country. But on the other hand, we would not look to just purchase from China and rule out other countries. For coal fuels, in the past, we had purchased from Australia and other countries instead of China because Chinese coals were relatively substandard. For the 71,000 submissions, those were from view collection forms. There was no option or question on whether the commenter supports decarbonization. After the press conference, the full report can be downloaded from the SDC website. Next. I'm from Apple Daily. You said there was no question on the form on whether people support decarbonization, but in a recent survey, there was a similar question, including regional cooperation. Can you tell us the percentage of respondents who support decarbonization? You received more than 70,000 views, but now you only have a framework and recommendations instead of concrete plans. I'd like to know the reason why. Winnie. Well, the question, there was no question on whether you support regional cooperation, but the question comes with a package of recommendations. I do not have the specific percentage on hand, but you may refer to the report later. But that question was not just about a single measure. It was about a series of measures. And regional cooperation was among the issues. Yes. This paper or report is more a blueprint we are proposing different areas to the government. If they agree on such principles, different government departments would come up with work plans. So in terms of how these are to be implemented, the government would review our report, and if they are agreeable, they would proceed to implementation plans. SCMP.
Morning from South China Morning Post. I would like to ask if the council thinks that the government should set up an overall working group or whatever to handle the overall implementation of this, your policy suggestions, considering that the Environment Bureau alone cannot do this. Is there going to be do you suggest that there should be a stronger group that works on this together to push through the policies? And I would like to also ask why there hasn't been any other concrete suggestions for other renewable energy in the fuel mix. Why only point out just nuclear energy in the presentation that you just showed us, considering how controversial nuclear energy already is? And do you think Hong Kong is currently lagging behind in China in terms of its targets, and how do you think you should make up this gap? Thank you.
Okay. Perhaps I answer your last question first. Japan and South Korea has just announced that they would have zero carbon by 2050. So in fact, Asia is moving in that direction, and Hong Kong cannot be left behind from that point of view. Your second question is renewable energy. One of the thing that Hong Kong lack is space and land, and renewable energy requires a lot of space, like solar panels, wind farms, and so on. So it is much more difficult for Hong Kong to carry out massive renewable energy industry as such. So we're looking at the practicality of that. The third thing is, as to the government, we hope this report will be adopted by the Environmental Bureau. If it is so, then it's up to the government to form a cross-bureau in order to implement the various suggestions that we put forward, so that they actually have a strategy towards bringing in 2050. This strategy does not involve just the Environmental Bureau, it involves the whole of government. And you're quite right that there will need to have a cross-bureau to look into this problem.
I can add one more point on the renewable energy, and that's
有關再生能源咧，另外一點就係話咧，喺呢個報告入邊，我哋都好強調呢一個係綠化嘅呢一個。
It's still not mature enough that we can directly go into the technology itself to build the power plant for hydrogen. But in the future, I would say that more work will be done in this area, and I would say that the government also will look into this area to be one of the potential source of energy for our power supply in Hong Kong.
Hydrogen power as such actually also requires carbonization, right? So hydrogen is not by itself is not the answer. Green hydrogen is to produce hydrogen by splitting water without carbonization, but that is still at the early stage at the moment, and we don't know what the cost would be, how effective it is, how much infrastructure is required in order to bring this about.
I'm from RTHK. My first question, your target of trying to be for Hong Kong to be carbon neutral by 2050, given the framework or the proposals that you have, do you see that as too ambitious a target for Hong Kong, given the situation that we are in right now? My second question is about the regional cooperation as laid out or suggested in the consultation paper. It appears that in your report right now, you dropped that term. Is it because that you receive a lot of objections to the idea of regional cooperation on the energy level? And actually, SNP had a question about nuclear energy. Why do you still plan to study that area, especially is it related to regional cooperation in this regard? And do you think that it would actually create more controversies going forward? Thank you.
Want to look into the...
Well, perhaps I answered it.
205.
205. Well, first of all, I don't think it is a difficult target, but it's not an unattainable target. We have the resources in Hong Kong, we have the talent, we have the manpower, we have the resources. So I believe that if we work together, we could achieve this. But it means that we have to work together. That means every Hong Kong person has to look into their own lifestyle and think about the climate change, because this is for our next generation, for the young people. As to the nuclear energy, well, first of all, nuclear energy, we do know that it's cheap, it's safe, and is readily available. But on the other hand, there is a question of safety. There's always the waste, the nuclear waste that it generates, what happens to it. So there are pros and cons, and we're not saying this is the only answer, but it is an answer that we have to consider.
My follow-up would be, is it because you received a lot of opposition during the consultation about regional cooperation in terms of energy that you now drop that term in your report? Is there any still need to buy energy from China? Is that still proposed by in your suggestions?
No, we're saying once again, I repeat what Professor Wong said, we are not saying we will buy energy from China or we will not buy energy from China. We're going to assess where the energy source is, whether it's reliable, whether it's cheap, whether it's safe. So we look into all possibilities. This is what our report says. We're not saying just because it's China, we have to buy it from China, or just because it's China, we must not have anything to do with China. Let us be practical and not get emotional over this.
If
we can take the last question now. Is there any media organization which is yet to ask the question? Hong Kong 01. I'm sorry. I'd like to ask a follow-up question. One of the your question is whether people support, low carbon lifestyle through regional cooperation so that we can achieve the target of the Paris Agreement. Have you received a lot of objection as answers to that question? And if so, is this reflected in your report? I also like to ask you this. In your report, have you ruled out the option of buying nuclear energy from the mainland? I'd like to ask whether Darwin, my colleague, has the data with him. Well, the data analysis report was not compiled by our center. It was actually done by the Social Science Research Center of the Hong Kong U. That is a very lengthy report. Honestly, I don't have the data on hand, but through the Secretariat, I can provide you with such data. The 71,000 opinion received, and also the 5,000 petitions the chairman alluded to, and these petitions from 52 organizations, green groups, and the detailed recommendations, the 600 written submissions. We've collated the views for the recommendation for the consideration of the council. And on the basis of such views, the Council proceeded with its deliberation. I also like to add that our public engagement, I think for the majority of the general public, supports our proposal for, decarbonization. That's the end of our, sorry, the lady is not coming through. She's not speaking in the microphone. I don't quite get your question. What is your question again? During the public engagement, period. Almost 90% of the members of the public agree that we should, go for decarbonization. But there are different means to do that, and there are different views on the subject. And the report, so we will follow those views accordingly. We're not saying that, we don't think we should let politics to get in the way, and we shouldn't say whether we should, have anything to do with the mainland or not. We will be submitting this report to the government today.
Okay.